Hey, what's happening? Yo, don't mind my scuffed hair. I haven't gone outside in a week. I'm still a bit sickly, so if my voice is a bit strange, that's why. But to be fair, being sickly also enabled me to read a little bit more. Hey, it's me. Let's talk about books. The last reading update has been a long time ago, but we are so close to the end of the year now. I had to do an update, and I'm glad that there's actually something for me to talk about, because a few weeks before now I wasn't even sure if there was gonna be. The thing is, my last update was in June, so that was 6 months ago, because I have not read any. That's not true. I have not finished a single text in most of those months. I had a lot more free time in the first half of the year. Now I'm way busier, so reading has been not only less of a priority, but also just something I didn't really have the willpower for, the energy at the end of the day. I had tried to read some things. I started reading Haunted by Palahniuk like in this summer somewhere, and made it not even halfway through it. Not because it's not interesting, it is. It's a story about writers, about a bunch of writers being stuck in a house, forced to write up short stories themselves. So it's kind of like a short story collection with a more elaborate frame story. If you never heard of it, it is a little bit infamous for being kinda disgusting. From my understanding, especially thanks to one specific short story that is in this book that happens early on, about a kid dying in a very strange way, doing something very inappropriate. Let's just say that. It's an interesting read. It's a bit of a unique, I guess, setup with this frame story and the plots of wacky, weird characters with their wacky, weird stories. Conceptually interesting, but somehow I couldn't really get into the flow, I guess. I haven't fully put it away and abandoned it, but I've also gotta be honest that I haven't read a word in this in probably a couple of months now, so who the fuck knows if I'm ever gonna finish this. And that, honestly, that was my situation for a while. I couldn't get any reading done, and the little that I did was on this book that I guess didn't really catch me, even though I am theoretically very interested in it. So I don't know where I was going with that, but now the month of December and November have been pretty prosperous. I finally fucking got shit done. That sweet cyanomethazoline. My reading challenge was technically almost done. I was just missing one book, right? That was the situation during the last update, and I would have been really pissed with myself if I wasn't able to finish at least one more book until the end of the year. So there was a bit of personal pressure, I guess, or ambition, if you wanna sound a bit more positive. And so I thought back, what book might I read that might not be as exhausting? I didn't feel like starting a 700-page fantasy epic now or something, right? So instead, I remembered I read Edward Levé's Suicide earlier this year. If you remember, I talked about this on this very couch. Actually, like I did the last time, we gotta bring back special guest Nicolas Cage, the sequin pillow, because he was there when I talked about Edward Levé's Suicide. In that video I said Autoportrait, Edward Levé's other book. I think there's a good chance that I'm gonna
read that sometime this year as well.
Which, from what I understand, is actually the only other book by him that was localized into English, which is kind of a shame. Although, to be fair, those two books are most likely the most interesting books Levé wrote. Still, bummer. You can't fucking make that out. It's his face in dots, which is very fitting to text. I'm very fucking glad that I read Suicide before I read Autoportrait for so many reasons. These two make up such an interesting couple of walks to learn about this artist. It's fascinating. As a quick recap, Suicide by Édouard Levé was a fictional text about a man that died of suicide, and the narrator was basically just reminiscing about the dead person's life. That's it. It was partially made popular, the book, because the author actually took his life right after finishing this book, which gave it another layer of meaning, another piece of the puzzle to analyze. You know, that people were theorizing whether this book was completely fictional or partially autobiographical about himself, or maybe about somebody he knew, maybe all of the above, who knows. Now, having read Autoportrait, which is not fictional, it is basically his actual memoir, although in an unusual way, because it is not written in a chronological way where he actually retells the story of his life. Autoportrait, very similar to Suicide, is written in a train of thought way where each individual sentence is has its own conclusion, and then it just moves on to another random piece of information. There's no story, there's no structure. It is literally one random thought, opinion, or observation he had, followed by another. They rarely connect to each other. There might be some that even contradict each other. I'm not entirely sure about that though. There are definitely a few that repeat. He talks about having flat feet at least twice. But that's the thing. There are very mundane memories or opinions here, followed by really heavy personal deep observations or whatever, or genuine detailed childhood memories or whatever, and then again something completely mundane and random. I consider the best part of the sock to be the hole. When I was a kid, I dreamed of suicide, and I thought I would only become 53 years old or something. You can't expect the next sentence. It's a colorful Jackson Pollock painting of random fragments of this personality, and that's what makes it so fucking good, in my opinion. It absolutely works as a memoir, but instead of dramatizing the life of the person or putting it in a entertaining 3-act structure or whatever, which most biographies do, this is a raw, personal, candid collection of individual fragments of a person that existed. And because of that, it's one of the most intimate, personal biographies or autobiographies that I've ever read. Even aside of all that conceptual value, it's also just a really easy read because how brisk the writing is, because it is just a string of random thoughts back to back. And again, like I said, I'm very happy I read Suicide before I read Autoportrait, because it puts so much of the former fictional text into perspective by learning about the author's real life this way. There are so many elements in this very real memoir that reflected things of the fictional text and vice versa, I guess, which gave it so much more value and really put this author, this person, this artist, I mean, he did a lot more things than just write, but it really put his work into proper perspective. He's a person now for me, not just an author, you know. I think the most blatant part where these two texts, his life and the fictional text of suicide, get together is when near the end, very close to the end, I think on the second to last page, he reminisces about a friend, a very close friend he used to have. He had very long, in-depth, drunken conversations on many a night, and he remembers him fondly. But then someday, when that friend and his wife were going to a tennis game, he said he forgot something, went back into the house and shot himself with a gun in the basement. That's literally the setup for the fictional book of suicide. That's literally what suicide was about. This confirms that the fictional text of Edward Levé's Suicide is based, at least in part, on his friend. This very real connection of author and fictional text. Like I said, reading both of these really fucking puts them both into perspective equally. The one completes the other, I guess. These two books marry the real life of an artist with his fictional work in such a candid way. It's amazing. I think I said when I talked about suicide that I wasn't like, I enjoyed reading Suicide. It was a brisk read anyway. I didn't have any distaste for it, and I thought the concept and history of the text was interesting, but I didn't really know what to take from it. But having read Autoportrait now gives it more of meaning. So I really liked Autoportrait, but it is, at the end of the day, this connection of these two texts that really makes them shine. Edouard Levé, man, what a man. I would have loved to see more of his works. Maybe I should. He was a photographer too. Maybe I should like check his photography books out or something. He was a genuinely interesting man. I'm convinced of that now. Yeah. So having read that, I was very happy with myself, because not only did I technically finish my 10 book a year reading challenge, but also it was a nice cherry on top. I'm glad I chose to read that. It was neat. But then I read more. Partially also because I got sick and I had a week off and I had time again to read more. Last year I read Charles Dickens' classic The Christmas Carol, which I liked decently enough but wasn't like in love with. This Christmas season, or this December, I felt like reading a little bit more of Dickens, because he has a lot more ghost stories in his repertoire, from what I gathered. Why not check out some more Dickens besides the famous Christmas one? And so I grabbed this little, what is it called? Free Ghost Stories compilation made by Project Gutenberg. You know, that infamous like ebook library. Like the title says, it's a compilation of free ghost stories written by Charles Dickens. The compilation itself is very short. It's not even 100 pages, so you know it's there's not much there. I was going in expecting an easy read. I gotta say though, out of the 3 stories in here, only one of which I was kinda vibing with. The other 2 were kinda didn't really click with me. The first one is called A Haunted House, which is literally about a family or a group of people moving into a haunted house and then having experiences with the ghosts inside. What I didn't know though is that this text by Charles Dickens was just a fragment of a bigger project where multiple authors wrote different parts of this haunted house story. So what this compilation gave me as Charles Dickens' short story was really just a fragment of a bigger thing, and I think that confused me a bit. But even now knowing it, what's going on, where this is coming from, this text, I still didn't really vibe with it. Like, there is some good writing coming from Dickens. I said that in Christmas Carol as well. Every now and then he has like a paragraph that's written so nicely that I that I go through it a few times because I really like it. But overall, Dickens' writing, this at least, is not very good. He goes on too many tangents, man. Too many like boxed in sentences and whatever. Like, it's not a smooth read. And the story itself also, like, there's a long ass introduction and then there's a really weird ghost encounter that feels more like a tangent than a proper continuation of the setup. The second story in this collection was Murder. The Trial for Murder. Which, I think it had a decent idea, but again, didn't click with me at all. I don't know. And then the third story, The Signalman, I actually kinda liked, because that actually was able to build up a decent atmosphere and had a nicely subdued story about two dudes talking over a couple of nights about the strange encounters one of them had while walking as a signalman at like a piece of train, a piece of railroad. And that was nice. It wasn't great, but it was nice, and that was the highlight for me in this free story collection. From what I gathered, this collection here isn't like regarded as one of the notable pieces of work from Dickens or whatever. Like, even Dickens fans seem to not really care much about these and regarding them as some of the weaker texts of his. So I guess I'm not having an unpopular opinion here. I don't know if I'm gonna read any more Dickens in the future. Not that I had planned to anyway. I feel like he's not entirely the writer for me, but one of his contemporaries might be more interesting for me. Segue to the next book. William Makepeace Thackeray was a contemporary of Charles Dickens, writing poems, travelogues, novels, and satire in his time during the 1800s. Wrote a bunch of notable classics as well, specifically Vanity Fair, Barry Lyndon, which is popular because of Stanley Kubrick's movie adaptation more than the text itself, and one more, come on. Fuck, what was it? Maybe that was it. Like, he wrote a bunch more, but these two are basically the bigger ones that are still remembered. Thought there was another one. Guess not. Anyway, he wrote those two, and I didn't read either of them because I read Catherine, a story. Catherine, whatever. And another Project Gutenberg ebook, because this is old as fuck and therefore public domain. I read this one because I stumbled over this and thought the concept was interesting, because William Makepeace Thackeray was, at the time of his life, a critic of the Newgate School of Writing, which means he was strictly against the romanticizing of real criminals, which was a very popular thing to do by authors at the time, Charles Dickens included. He did that too, the motherfucker. It was just a normal thing to do. Back in the day, in the 1800s, even before that, but in the 1800s specifically, there was the Newgate Calendar, which was a magazine, I guess, put out by the Newgate prison, which chronicled all the executions they'd made, they fulfilled, all the criminals that were executed were talked about in this magazine, partially as entertainment, because executions were entertainment back in that day. That's just how it is. And many authors at the time took these criminal records, these people, as inspiration for their stories. Plenty of books, many of them are even classics today, that had characters in there that were one-to-one taken from these real-life criminals that were executed there, and then like fictionalized, romanticized, glorified even. Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist, for example, has a notable character that's based on a criminal that was executed at the time. It was just a very popular thing to do. And William Thackeray was, I guess, one of the few people that were harshly against that practice because he thought it was immoral. I guess that makes sense, right? It is a bit of a weird thing to do, to like look into the papers of who fucking got executed for doing a heinous task or not, and then like making them the character in your book. I don't know, it's a bit weird, right? And William Thackeray thought, I'm gonna show him how vile this practice actually is. I'm gonna write my own novel about a real life criminal, and I'm gonna prove that if you would leave out the roses and flowers and actually write the scoundrel like they are, then you would realize how utterly worthless these characters are as a protagonist or anything in a book, and how tasteless the whole act is. It was like more or less the idea behind Catherine, which is a fascinating concept, especially for the time in the 1800s. And so I thought I wanted to read it. Catherine takes its name from the real life woman Catherine Hayes, who was burned to death for committing murder about 100 years before Thackeray wrote the book. So she lived and breathed and died in the 1700s, and he then wrote his book in the 1800s, right? Also, Catherine Hayes probably deserved better. Let's be honest. Especially if you read up a bit about her actual history. She deserved better, man. She did not deserve to burn at that stake. I am gonna say that right end here. Honestly, so did the fictional version of Catherine Hayes in this book, because this project of showing the world how bad of an idea, how bad of a practice it is to write a story romanticizing criminals wasn't very successful. I think Thackeray himself stated at some point or another that he deemed his experiment or whatever unsuccessful, and even he eventually, while writing the story, fell into sympathizing with this fictional Catherine Hayes that he created. So what the fuck? It's just funny to me. It goes out there to show the world, to give him a reality check, and then even he agrees that it was kind of a blunder. Cool. And the book itself, before knowing all of like the details, I was going into the book like expecting a maybe a full-on misogynistic demonization of this woman. I was kind of preparing for a miserable read. That wasn't really the case, though. For one, there are many more characters here besides Catherine that take the spotlight. All of them male, and they are all shitty. And also, I think they are also based on real criminals. Like, the whole story is based on the actual life of that Catherine Hayes that existed, although there's no way it was one-to-one accurate. It's just a fictionalized version, a dramatization with liberties taken. And so this book is full of terrible men, and I'm sure there is like a disconnect between the book and me reading it, because 200 years passed and we look at certain things differently these days. But I think most people who would read that book now, at least, would agree that Catherine Hayes was a victim of her circumstances. And to be fair, the book acknowledges that too, to a degree. Catherine Hayes, in the book, well, in real life too, Catherine Hayes was put into a bad spot at a very young age and surrounded by bad men for most of her life. And honestly, it's not like surprising that she snapped at one point, which the real life version might not even did. There is reason to believe that she never actually did the crime that she was tried for. Look it up, people. But let's stick to the fictional version. She did do the heinous crime in this story, but reading the book, getting closer and closer to the end, you cannot fucking wait for her to do it. And the whole thing, like I said, I expected like something really dire maybe, or something really like miserable to read. And honestly, at points it was pretty fucked. I mean, not that it's ever like very graphic or like going into those details, but especially in the first chapter or two, when the whole situation like gets built up and explained, there are points where you're like, my god, man, all these people are just awful. Fuck me. But honestly, the longer it goes on, the more it just feels like a satire of itself. Which is probably partially intentional and partially not at all. Sometimes it has the vibe of like a mystery science theater episode, because the author comes into the story and comments on it. It's himself sometimes, which is just funny. He goes out of his way to, for example, describe how a scene would have taken place if it was happening in one of his contemporaries' books, you know, where it would be heavily dramatized and like played up for the audience and whatever. And then he goes, but I'm not doing that. I'm staying on the ground and I'm showing you how it would really be. Isn't it dull? It's so fucking funny, honestly. And I believe there's some self-awareness to that too. I don't think it's all like convinced to do this amazing feat. I think there's like tongue-in-cheekness to this whole thing. But it's funny either way, intentional or not. He goes on at points to like apologize to the reader for introducing them to these utterly worthless characters and shit. It's hilarious. And the plot itself isn't even bad. I guess. I mean, it's not great. I don't want to praise this book because I didn't love it, but it was an interesting read, and I was entertained at points, both because the concept was so interesting and it was interesting to see it fall apart. But also because Thackeray isn't a bad writer. I actually like his writing. I'd actually be inclined to read more of his. But this was just like a misguided attempt at something in so many ways. Still makes for an entertaining read, I feel like. It's kind of ironic though, because it kind of is that he wanted to make a shitty novel on purpose, or a boring run, because of how much he wanted to prove that real criminals are not to be romanticized and wouldn't work as interesting characters if you would actually show them the way they are or whatever. But like, even his story about these criminals is fairly interesting. The story isn't mundane, really. There's some good, interesting stuff that happens. I didn't mind it. I actually had a decent time. And all of that with the cherry on top, that his fucking project, his concept just didn't flourish the way he wanted, I guess. And his own parody-esque tangents and comments on his own story while writing this, I don't know, it just came together and sometimes in a very entertaining way. It wasn't like, I wouldn't call it great. I wouldn't even necessarily recommend it. But I guess it was a oh my god. But I guess it was a pleasant surprise, while I didn't really know what to expect from this. I don't know, I surprisingly enjoyed this. Again though, to close this out, Catherine Hayes, both the fictional version and the real life person, probably, most likely deserved better. Anyway, yeah, that's that. Those are the 3 texts that I read since the last update video. That's it. At the time of making this video, it's December the 18th, so there is not much left to the year. I'm making this video now because I will probably not be able to make it later. The end of the year is gonna be a bit busy. So there's the possibility that I'm reading another book before the year actually ends. This is like, I guess, it. I finished my reading challenge with 12 out of 10 books. Again, like I say every time, admittedly, 3 of those texts are barely books, so they only technically make up a spot in this list. The Last Messiah was just a short essay. Stop Looking at Your Phone was a gimmicky coffee table picture book. And Unknown Number was a short story made up of screenshots. So I guess you could say I read 9 proper books and then 3 short texts. Still good enough for me. I'm glad I like reached this number before the end of the year. I'm pretty happy with that. Going into the next year, 2023, I do not know how that's gonna go, because I am, like I said, quite busy at this point of my life. I'm probably gonna put my reading challenge for 2023 at 10 books again and just see what happens. Don't know even if I'm gonna make videos that year about my reading. I probably will, but they might. Like what? I did 3 reading updates during this year. Next year's probably not gonna have much more, probably less. And I'm not even that confident that I'm actually gonna be able to read 10 books next year, as I'm actually gonna be busy. I'll keep the possibility open. I'm still gonna read whenever I can, have the energy and want to, right? I'm still gonna read when I feel like it. Will I reach my reading challenge though? Who the fuck knows? But that's it for 2022. I successfully did it. Thanks for following my reading journey throughout the year. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you all had a decent year at least. Have a nice New Year's Eve, I guess. And yeah, thanks for watching. Bye bye.